Hi, I'm Lucas, and this is our review of Star Trek The Next Generation. This is Namir, Ahmed, and Alan O'Neill, and we're all Trekkies in one way or another. Some are more Trekkies than others.
I'm like a casual Trekkie.
I've watched it all, even just the Discovery. I'm caught up.
That's a sad
I'm
Trekkie.
sorry.
You're a sad Trekkie.
Namir is the voice of reason.
I know.
And
I know.
And Alan is the shining example of what we can all become.
Encounter at Farpoint, Season 1, Episode 1. Written by D.C. Fontana and Gene Roddenberry. Directed by Corey Allen. We're introduced to a new Starship Enterprise and its crew, commanded by the most British Frenchman in the known universe. They are en route to learn just how some backwater hillbilly aliens constructed an advanced station for the Federation. An omnipotent being, Q, decides to stop the Enterprise mid-trip with a giant space fishing net and orders humanity back to Earth. Picard gives Q the idea to hold the trial and go old Judge Judy on humankind's collective asses. After a brief hearing, Q agrees that the Farpoint mission will be a good test of human progress. Meanwhile, at Farpoint, First Officer Riker meets with the leader of the Bandi, Groppler Zorn, who looks like the cross between a meth head and someone you wouldn't want to leave your children with. During the meeting, Riker starts to notice that his wishes seem to come true, and Dr. Crusher and her son notice the same thing while shopping for the most hideous fabric money can buy at Farpoint Market. The Enterprise arrives at Farpoint just as a UFO does a reenactment of Independence Day on the Bandi's Shack City. Q thinks Picard should attack the flying saucer, but the crew determines that it's just an angry, shape-shifting space jellyfish trying to free its sickly life partner who's being made to take the shape of Farpoint Station. The Enterprise heals the creature with some energy, and it takes off into space to have a couple minutes of tender tentacle loving with its partner and then fly off together into deep space. Q gives humans a pass for now to keep on trucking, and Picard and company leave orbit for further adventures with a complete disregard to the fact that the Bandi are probably in desperate need of some humanitarian aid, as their city is now ravaged with death and destruction.
You know, we all grew up kind of watching the original series, and it's very different from the original series, right? It feels like a little bit more military. I don't know if that's the right way to describe it, but it's you get a more of a sense that the ship is a submarine, right? Like a submarine in space. So in that way, I kind of liked it because it felt a little bit, as odd as it sounds, it felt a little bit more realistic. And then it was good. It was good Star Trek. It's a good, solid story.
I feel like I'm going to be the polar opposite of this.
Oh, good.
It's the worst of the Star Trek pilots. I found the acting very wooden.
I'm a Klingon, sir. For me to seek escape when my captain goes into battle.
You are a Starfleet officer, Lieutenant.
And like you say, it does feel more formal than the original series, but I think, you know, that they're kind of stuffy. They all kind of have the same personality. And it's funny that, you know, when they wrote this, I guess, you know, Q was like an add-on because they wanted a feature-length pilot. And I guess the original one was just them going and you know, solving the mystery of the Farpoint station. But, you know, I felt Q was probably the best part of it. You know, it was inconsistent with his later portrayals.
Thou art notified that thy kind hath infiltrated the galaxy too far already. Thou art directed to return to thine own solar system immediately.
That's quite a directive.
You come into that and it is totally different. You know, they went back. They pretty much built it from the ground up. It's totally different from the original. You never saw uniforms like that.
I always find whenever I'm watching season 1 of The Next Generation, particularly the first episode, that it feels in a lot of ways like the original series season 4. And in the way that the episodes are written, how the characters talk, and some of the lingo, it's kind of this old-fashioned lingo like from the 60s.
Something strange on this detector circuit.
There's that whole sequence where they separate the saucer. They go as fast as they can and they separate the saucer. And that whole scene doesn't really serve any purpose dramatically, and it makes no sense. They play the Next Generation theme over it as if it was like, you know, like the Superman theme or something.
I'm a Star Trek fan, but I'm not as deep into it as you guys, as Alan. That scene made sense to me. Like, one of the things that never made sense to me was taking the Enterprise into war when it had families and kids on it, right? But they did it all the time, and I think the saucer separation was to address that, right? So they did that in the first episode. That sort of ties into my military thing, right? Because when you're in the military, you just follow the procedure, and that to me seemed like the procedure. So yeah, I agree with you where, you know, it was kind of like, you know, a chance to show off some special effects and have some drama, blah blah blah. But it made complete sense to me when I saw that. I was like, oh yeah, of course. I don't want to take my family into some sort of crazy battle. Yeah, take the frisbee and go over that way. You know, we'll take the guns and we'll go counter this thing. You know?
I think that the idea behind it, and there were other things that they improved over the original series, made sense. But the way it felt to me that the way that they were doing it in this episode felt contrived. And the other thing that you said, Alan, was that originally the episode was just going to be about the Farpoint mystery. And then Paramount wanted a two-parter, so Gene Roddenberry came in and created Q and filled it all out. And I just feel like it's really clunky because all the Q stuff just seems like kind of shoehorned in, randomly interspaced. And although he is a really cool character, and I like a lot of the Q stuff, the way that he functions in the story is almost to the detriment to the episode for me, because what's interesting for me and what really works for me is all the Farpoint mystery stuff. He's kind of like the court jester or the peanut gallery, going like, you're messing up. Well, I'm watching you, you know, and it just kind of breaks the flow of the episode because there's a real mystery for them to solve. And I wish that I could see just a version of the episode that was just the Farpoint stuff.
You know, it's funny. Like I agree with Alan. Like, I think that episode would have been so lame without Q and that entire storyline. Like that to me is the way more interesting part of the episode of the 90 minutes, right? Because it's giving you some stakes, right? Like it's for a pilot episode, basically what it's doing is it's setting up the entire show, right? Like they're in this new ship, they're exploring, and they hit this barrier, right? They hit Q as this basically this brick wall, and if they don't get past Q, then they're not going to be able to explore the universe. Is essentially what's going on.
What I like about the Q character and that he's introduced, especially knowing the backstory that he was kind of like a late addition, was how defining the Q character became for the series. And this idea that humans are going to evolve over thousands of years and eventually become godlike. And it's sort of this mythological underpinning of the whole thing. Because otherwise it's just a show about humans that go to space and you know, have interesting scientific inquiries or mysteries. But then you have this whole underneath, like we're dealing with God, essentially, and I wouldn't say religious, but semi-spiritual kind of. You start going to that territory, which is never really what Star Trek was about. The other thing I like about Q is the magical element of him. He shows up and he does this quick like recap of human history. Where he starts off like Christopher Columbus, and then he's like a soldier, an American soldier, and then he goes and he's like post-apocalyptic, like war, like soldier guy who's like on drugs, and so you kind of get like a little backstory of human history through all his little things, and then you go to the trial that's supposed to take place in this post-apocalyptic world. I'm like, that is cool. That is what they should be doing a TV show about now. If they want to be like introducing a lot of violence and swearing and whatever, that's what they should be doing.
It's funny. Like every time I watch one of the older Star Trek episodes, I keep automatically comparing it to Discovery, and I'm like, Discovery is so trash compared to anything like before it, and it's hard for me to understand how it went from that first episode, even with its flaws, to Discovery. I can't figure out what that line is.
It's called J.J. Abrams. That was the portal.
There is no line because they just got rid of everybody who ever made Star Trek and just put new people who didn't know Star Trek in charge.
Yeah, that makes sense.
They start a new line, which is inferior to the old line.
Genetically inferior.
The other thing I noticed about this episode that I hadn't really thought about before, there's like a kind of almost like Time Bandits meets Willow. There's not like a time travel element, but there's that jumping around. And there's also this idea of the people who've built or supposedly built the base. Their whole village is like this medieval village. And when he goes to see Groppler Zorn, it's got these heavy oak doors. And I just like that there's this whole medieval kind of like element to the episode in juxtaposition with the high-tech science fiction elements.
I always appreciated how there was a callback in Star Trek Nemesis to that when Riker says, like, oh, when I met him, he was trying to whistle a tune, and I can't remember what it was. And I'm like yelling, screaming, it was Pop Goes the Weasel.
Then your rank of lieutenant commander is honorary.
No, sir. Starfleet class of 78, honors in probability mechanics and exobiology.
But your file says that you're a
Machine, correct, sir. Does that trouble you?
To be honest, yes, a little.
Understood, sir. Prejudice is very human.
Now that does trouble me. Do you consider yourself superior to us?
I am superior, sir, in many ways. But I would gladly give it up to be human.
Nice to meet you, Pinocchio.
You really get the sense that he's trying to nail down how he's portraying Data, right? Like there's that one scene where he grabs Wesley out of the river and he's holding Wesley over him and he's looking up and he's got this really super creepy smile on his face. And you're like, oh, is he gonna murder Wesley?
You can tell that that's totally a stuntman now in HD that jumps across the rocks, not Brent Spiner.
Yeah.
It's like all the stuff in HD now is like, it's very obvious.
Sir, maybe I should get something to wipe this water up.
Good idea.
I was not a Star Trek fan when this episode came out. And I remember watching it and not really knowing anything about Star Trek, but I thought it was really cool that he could see things differently with his visor.
Oh, the visor is very cool.
Just to be like, hey, this is what I'm seeing. I'm looking at it like magnetically, spectrographically.
How are you examining them, Geordi?
In every way. Microscopically, thermally, electromagnetically. None of it is familiar.
It's like he's got gadget eyes, you know?
I don't understand the first season why there was a running thing about sending Geordi to look at the nearest window to use his visor to get additional sensor data. And he never ever saw anything that the sensors already did. And so I was like, there's a lot of weird things going on out there. And I'm like, what? And that's what he does here too. Like in the alien ship, and they're like, oh, what do you see with your visor? I'm like, it's no material I recognize or have even heard of.
It's of no material I recognize, sir, or have even heard of.
Yeah, they didn't use tricorders or anything, right? They didn't pop those things out.
No, yeah, it's kind of odd.
And there's a lot of little moments like that in this episode where they're like introducing like superpowers, basically, or abilities that the characters have. Like they have Tasha Yar beat up that soldier. They do. They have Data mimicking voices.
The captain had asked the question.
Can we assume you mean this will be a fair trial?
They introduce the holodeck, and they do a whole like holodeck, like check it out, it's the holodeck. Which, by the way, when I was 13, was the coolest part of the show.
Why can anyone just walk in? There's like no privacy. Like I figured that'd be like a bathroom, you know? Because like you don't know what people are doing in there. It's like, and Riker just walks right in. The computer tells him, "Oh yeah, that's where Data is." Like we don't know what Data's doing in there. He might be exploring his humanity.
Berkeley has a lot of sex in there.
Oh yeah, he totally does.
He does. Yeah.
Don't go in there with a blue light.
I want to point out that Picard says "make it so" in this episode, which I think is really cool that they introduce it so early.
Does he? I thought he said engage. You mean at the end of the episode?
No, not the end of the episode. Somewhere in the first third of the episode. I forget exactly.
Eyes are into standard parking orbit.
Make it so.
Also, I noticed that he calls Troi commander instead of counselor.
Yeah, I noticed that too. But he also calls her counselor in the same episode.
Yeah, and she wears that mini skirt in this episode, and she seems really like awkward in it.
Yeah.
Her whole character is very like different in this episode compared to the rest of the show. How she wears her hair, how she dresses, how she exhibits her powers.
It took her from like a cheerleader type to like totally frumpy and
isn't frumpy like baggy? What's frumpy mean?
Yeah, it's like kind of like just bland, like bland colors and yeah.
Mm-hmm. But they got rid of the skirts for season 2, right?
Yes. Yeah, because they were like a unisex thing. It was kind of progressive, at the time. That they saw a guy running through, one of those on, and it's like, oh. Mm-hmm. And I think Yar's wearing it at the end too when they're do the shot of the bridge in the last scene.
Oh, at the end.
Yeah.
If you're wondering about Mom, Commander Riker, she's not unfriendly. She's just shy around men she doesn't know.
Wesley, I believe that means he would like us to be friends.
Oh, I'm willing, Doctor.
I always found it odd too that the characters, I mean, they were kind of stupid. Beverly says like, "Oh, I take this fabric if it had gold on it," and then she turns around and there's gold on it. Oh, it is gold. I'm like, I guess I'll take the whole thing, and then she's send it out to my ship.
I'll take the entire bolt. Send it to our starship when it arrives.
Like the bolt of cloth. It's just it's kind of a weird. They could have made something a little bit more effective or a little bit more obvious.
And what's up with that shopkeeper too? He just kind of stares blankly at her the whole time. It's very creepy.
Groppler Zorn looks like a pedophile.
Geothermal energy is one of the great blessings of this planet. I'll have all the details of that sent to your quarters.
Thank you.
All right. We agree there is evidence to support the court's contention that humans have been savage. Therefore, I say test us. Test whether this is presently true of humans.
I want to say that this is like the most overacting that Patrick Stewart does in the whole series. And there's a lot of Namir.
I totally disagree. I don't know. I feel like the acting's been pretty consistent, at least across the first season. Like this is not.
Well, yeah, the first season you can't compare. Yeah. Counselor Troi is a perfect example.
Right.
The overacting of this episode compared to the rest of the series.
Pain.
But I don't think she was overacting. I think what they were trying to do was, anytime she like used her empath powers, she felt that. It started off being something more like she sort of takes on those emotions, and it became more like, oh, I understand that those emotions are happening, but it's not affecting me.
So you're saying you don't think there's any overacting in this episode?
I don't think there's any more overacting in this episode than in any of the other episodes.
No, I'm going to revisit this with you, Namir, and when we get to season 2 or 3, I'm going to be like, you remember when you said that thing about the overacting?
If you watch it again, like right now, it's not it.
I just watched it like 2 hours ago. You're
And
saying
I just watched it 2 days ago. Yeah.
I feel like you needed to have watched it like immediately before this conversation.
I did.
More immediately.
Ashiar was the most overacting when she comes to that court. She's like, and she says, "It's like it was people like these that saved me." And I'm like, what?
Because I grew up in a world that allowed things like this court, and it was people like these that saved me from it. This so-called court should get down on its knees to what Starfleet is.
Detailed exposition about her backstory, just like
I know. That was a little bit forced. But my point of view on this is that when I was watching it, I didn't ever feel like those emotions were fake.
They're great actors. It's a great cast, and it was well cast. They were just victims of bad writing, really, the kind of clunky dialogue. Because Roddenberry had his hands in a lot of those early scripts.
I don't know, man. I disagree. I totally do. I really thought like there were some great episodes in the first season. You know, a couple of my favorite episodes are in the first season.
I think Roddenberry, he may have lost his touch over the years. And not to say that everything he touched turned to shit. He was the creative force behind The Next Generation. Namir's totally checked out. Namir's on Wikipedia.
There's a lot of hate for season 1. Like, people do not like The Next Gen season 1. I did not realize that. Like the first result is like, why is Next Generation season 1 so bad? Now I have to hang on. Now I have to check what episodes are in season 1.
See, maybe you didn't like season 1 as much as you think.
Maybe I didn't. Maybe I hated it.
Over here. I've asked the counselor to join us in this meeting.
That is my one complaint about the episode is the Riker Troi stuff. What does she say? She's like,
Do you remember what I taught you, Imzadi? Can you still sense my thoughts?
A pleasure, Commander.
yeah, that's it. And I was like, oh man, that was totally
And
just
I didn't
wrong.
get when Picard goes like, "Oh, you know each other?" I'm like, I like when my officers know each other's abilities. I'm like,
I consider it important for my key officers to know each other's abilities.
We do, sir.
what? That's your expectation? That was a very weird thing to say.
What kind of abilities are you referring to?
He's French. You know, their moral standards are different.
But what I like about that scene is how they're totally like leering at each other, and Picard is completely oblivious to what's going on between them.
Yeah.
So he's totally either playing it cool, like, oh, this is so awkward. Oh, so you guys know each other?
Why wouldn't they know that they were both assigned to the same ship, or did they?
I think he would know. The crew manifest.
Yeah, and why wouldn't Picard know that too? Like, wouldn't he know that there was something between them? I guess not. Maybe not.
Isn't that basically a throwback from unused plot points from Phase 2 in the 70s? That Decker and Aaliyah were going to be an item, and they had kind of a past romantic relationship, and then they were like just meeting again on the Enterprise.
When they did The Next Generation, they kind of recycled elements of stuff that they had created for Perfect Phase 2.
I feel like this is going to turn into explaining Star Trek to Namir.
Well, that's why we got you to be part of this.
Yeah, that still doesn't explain why that scene was so bad between Riker and Troi.
But I'm glad you brought it up so I could tell you all about my Star Trek knowledge.
Oh, yeah.
Have the two of you met before?
We have, sir.
Excellent.
It took me out of the episode for a couple of seconds where I was like, oh, this is odd. And then it just kept going again, which is great. It just picked it right up. But there's a couple of moments there where you end up somewhere where you're not expecting, and you have a second of like, this is odd, but then it moves on to something else, and you're like, oh, this is interesting. It's like the height of action. There's like a ton of stuff happening. I think Q had just like appeared on the bridge, and then Picard, he leaves the bridge, but then he ends up talking to Crusher.
I didn't want you thinking me harsh. Cold-blooded.
Why would I ever think that?
I didn't welcome you aboard personally, professionally.
And I'm like, did he leave the bridge to go do that? You know, they're in the middle of a crisis. You know, like that's why he left. You know, like that. You know, and there's like moments like that in the episode where I'm like, that did not belong there originally. They just put that in there because they needed that to be in there. They just weren't sure where to put it.
Welcome aboard, Doctor.
Well, speaking of weird scenes, one scene that I thought was really funny was when Riker shows up on the battle bridge and Picard says, bring him up to speed. And they just park in front of a TV.
They recorded everything and edited it together in a quick reel.
Well, it didn't make any sense either. Like you're watching it over a shoulder and you're like, I watched the episode. I watched all that happen and I still don't know what's going on.
The thing they show them is incomplete. They just show a recap of what Q is doing, and then they don't show any of the trial.
Because how could they record that?
Exactly. But if you don't have the trial, nothing makes sense. There's nothing.
No, exactly. Yeah.
From this point, no station aboard. Repeat, no station for any reason will make use of transmitted signals or intercom.
When Picard says, now hear this, from now on, nobody's going to be using the comms.
He says printout only, but there's never any paper around.
I don't know. I guess maybe that's printout like hard copy. But basically he says, so he's like, we're not going to use the comm system because somehow Q can
hear it?
Can hear it. So then he sends Worf down through the elevator to give a message to the engineering section. And then Worf says, "You guys ready?" Yep. And then he goes back upstairs. He goes, "Hey, we're ready." He's like, "You're telling me that Q, with all his powers, you think that he can't like listen in on Worf?"
He should have just whispered it into like some engineer's ear.
Come.
Not exactly a run-of-the-mill happening, Captain.
There's this one part that I love where Picard is at his desk and he essentially is giving Riker a hard time, right, when they first meet. And then he's like, you have to, dock the saucer in the battle bridge. Riker leaves and Picard looks up and he's got this like really, really slight smile, right? And when you see that, you're like, okay, he's just giving him a hard time because he's putting him through his paces. There's stuff like that through the episode. You just, you need to look for it.
I agree with you completely. And there are two scenes in particular that I want to highlight. The introduction of Dr. Crusher and Geordi LaForge. That is an amazing scene. And it's such a run-of-the-mill kind of throwaway scene where you get a little backstory on his visor. And he's such a great actor. Yeah. And she's pretty naturalistic, and it plays off as like a doctor and patient like banter.
Usually you would think of that as just exposition, but it was like exposition in the context of like, yeah, they were having a friendly little chat, and she was suggesting, why don't you get an implant or surgery? And I'm like, I like that, how he kind of played off his long-winded like exposition as kind of a joke. Sounds like I've told this story a zillion times.
The visor appliance you wear is
a remarkable piece of bioelectronic engineering by which I, quote, see much of the EM spectrum, ranging from simple heat and infrared through radio waves, etc., and forgive me if I've said and listened to this 1,000 times before.
You've been blind all your life.
Mm-hmm. I was born this way.
It feels really human and real. And that's a good foreshadowing of what the show will become.
If you got some reason you want my atoms scattered all over space, boy.
No, sir. But at your age, sir, I thought you shouldn't have to put up with the time and trouble of a shuttlecraft.
Hold it right there, boy.
Sir?
What about my age?
The scene with Dr. McCoy.
Yes.
And considering how ham-fisted this scene could have been of just like inserting Dr. McCoy randomly, like what the hell is he doing at Farpoint Station? But
calling her 137-year-old expert.
Like that guy's like post-retirement. Let's bring him to the edge of the galaxy to come and check out some medical supplies. But that scene he does with Data is like pitch perfect, and it's like a two-part scene where the first part he's kind of trying to figure out who Data is, and he thinks that Data's a Vulcan, and it's kind of jokey. but it's played perfectly. And then there's the second part of the scene where it's like, now we're going into nostalgia, and it gets me every time. I love that scene every time, and I just love that he's just like has this little cameo. That scene is another example of you get a taste of how great Next Generation is going to be later.
Well, this is a new ship, but she's got the right name. Now, you remember that, you hear?
I will, sir.
You treat her like a lady, and she'll always bring you home.
You know anything about Farpoint Station, sir? Sounds like a fairly dull place.
Do you guys believe that Meaney is O'Brien in this episode?
No. His character is like BridgeCon or something.
Right. Later on, they try to retcon it, but it's obviously not O'Brien. It's just a coincidence that he was hired and he was in that episode. And
what do you mean that later on they tried to retcon it?
So in the very last episode, they bring him back in that same red uniform, and he's O'Brien.
I always considered him O'Brien when I watch Encounter Farpoint. I'm like, yeah, that's O'Brien.
Yeah, absolutely. He got promoted.
His rank never made any sense.
Mr. O'Brien, trust me, I know you can do it.
So Picard has a little ready room on the side of the battle bridge. And I noticed for the first time that there's like sound baffles on the wall.
Oh, they had those all over the place in this show.
Oh, really?
Yeah, they always use that for like set decorations. It looks futuristic, I guess.
I know. I'm wondering, is that supposed to be futuristic, or is that where like Picard like records all his captain's logs?
Yeah.
One thing I really noticed rewatching the episode this time is how great the visual effects are.
Oh, yeah.
ILM did the visual effects for this one episode, and then they just reused a bunch of it like stock footage in the rest of the show. But it's really good, especially some of those separation shots or those. Mm-hmm. And there's some really good money shots, like the opening shot where it's the ship starts up here and then goes down, and then you like move into the ship.
I love those beauty shots, and that's what modern Star Trek doesn't have anymore. I'm like, where's the beauty shots now with these ships? And like this all CGI shit everywhere. And I'm like, I just like the slow sweeping camera.
Like actually, that's one of the things that I really like about the original Star Trek across the entire series is that there's like actual blocking. Like you can see more than two people on the screen at once, and there's people in the background and they're doing things. There's like stuff happening, like it's not like super over edited, like which is totally the case now.
So what do we think about the ending and the resolution of the episode?
That it was filled with great joy and gratitude.
Yeah, joy and gratitude.
From both of them.
Great joy and gratitude. From both of them.
From all of us.
I thought it was Star Trek-y. It was, it was fine. Yeah. It wrapped everything up pretty nicely.
That's like when Riker says, "Oh, I wonder if this is how most of our missions will go." And then Picard's like, "Oh, I'm sure they'll be much more interesting." And then the next two episodes is like everyone drunk, and then the African planet. I'm like, oh my god, just embarrassing. It's very, very Spielberg with the jellyfish creatures and the whole. Yeah, I really like the visual effects of that, and yeah, it had a very nice Star Trek message about peace, love, and understanding. So
yeah, I do wish that they'd explained the creatures a little bit more.
I like they didn't explain it. I like that they left them a mystery.
I wasn't bothered that they didn't really explain it, but I just kind of made my own drew my own conclusions.
Yeah.
Star Trek is at its best when it has a certain amount of like wide-eyed, childlike innocence and a sense of wonder. And I think that's one thing I really like is that they really lean hard into that in this episode at the end, and it totally pays off and it totally works.
I think too, did they change their colors in the remastered version? I think they used to both be blue, and then they changed it to like blue and pink, so you could tell they were like a boy girl and like a mate meeting again.
I think you might be right.
It feels kind of dumb. Like, why couldn't they just both be blue? Maybe they were both dudes. I'm like, it's the 21st century. I'm like, why do we got to make it make it obvious that it's pink and blue. But I always thought that's kind of a weird choice.
Not all creatures have to have penises. They could just be like, they could be non-gender. They could just be like, just jellyfish. Jellyfish.
It was a weird choice for the remaster project. I thought, I'm like, why would they gender them?
Yeah, why can't they just be spaceships in love?
So, if you guys were gonna rate this out of 10, what would you give this out of 10?
I don't know. I think Alan should go first because I'll rate it based on Alan's rating.
Again, I found the script was really weak, and the performances. I mean, we're still finding their feet. So, I mean, I'd probably give it like a 6, maybe a 5 or 6 out of 10. I mean, because I do enjoy it. I mean, it does hold Star Trek's ideals. Like the story is there, all the elements are there for Star Trek, and it was new, fresh looking. The sets were amazing, the specs were amazing, the music was amazing. It was just the writing that really gets me in the awkwardness of a lot of the scenes.
I thought the writing was quite strong. I liked the writing. I thought it was well done. I thought the acting was really great. And let's see, what else is opposite of Alan?
It's okay. We'll still be friends.
No, I mean, I you know, like I said, I thought it was a really great first episode. Like I've seen a lot of pilot episodes of shows, and they're not like, a lot of them are tonally, they don't know what they are yet, right? Even with its flaws, it always knew what it was, and that comes across, and that's really, really hard to do. So I would give it an 8.
The elements that really work, like those scenes I mentioned, and you know, I preferred the Farpoint station mystery. Those and you know, some parts of the Q stuff I really liked as well, and that's like an 8 out of 10. And then there's some parts that are redundant or don't make any sense, like that whole saucer separation sequence, or like the overacting with the Tashiar in the courtroom, and that's kind of makes it like a 6. So I say it's like a 7. I think I love the fact that also the way that Star Trek does their pilots is that it's basically all the characters meeting for the first time. So it's really an origin story, and it's really fun to see an origin of something, which you didn't get to see in the original series until J.J. Abrams kind of created this story later.
I would like more exciting, more interesting encounters.
But you want them to go somewhere, right? Like if they start off, when they meet parachuting or something, or they meet going through a black hole, where there's nowhere to go, right? Like, that's kind of what I like about it. Is like, it's just like people doing their job. It's like, people on this amazing ship in space, but really they're just doing their job. They're just doing what they're getting paid to do, right?
Except
but they're not like, what's that?
Except not getting paid at all.
There's no money in the 24th century.
Well, they're getting, getting paid in warm feelings, hugs, and accolades.